Six Sigma is about reducing variation. Why is it important? Variation is the enemy of the business. Variation means that you are not sure about what's the quality of your next output is. Therefore, it's about reducing defects. Defects means that sometimes you make a good item, sometimes you produce the wrong one. And with Six Sigma, you can reduce the number of wrong items, or if you are a production company. But it's also true for a service company. The third point is actually saying the same, improving predictability. If you reduce the variation, you produce less mistakes, less defects. Therefore, you know that what you can expect as a quality of your output. So you know that your next output will be within certain range that is acceptable for the customer. If you try to dot it on a chart, and it's a little bit statistic stuff, I have to admit, but okay, let's keep it very simple. If you are producing an item and it has a certain dimension, for example length, then you will see that on average you produce this length, but there are less number of items that have a greater length, and there are less number of items having shorter lengths than the average. So this is a normal distribution. What does Six Sigma have to do with normal distribution? Normal distribution can be described by this distance. This distance is the distance between average and the inflection point of this normal curve. This distance, called standard deviation, describes the variation of your process. The more variation you have, the higher is the standard deviation. Why is it bad? It's bad because the customer, whether it's your technical department, the quality department, or the end user of your product or service, says that I can accept your product or service between these ranges. It's called upper spec limit or lower spec limit. The higher your variation means that you are producing items or services that are delivering services that are outside the specification of your customer. Means defects, means quality is bad, means you have costs, too high costs. So this is what we are after, reducing the variation. If you translate Six Sigma means there are only 3.4 defects out of million opportunities. So if you would produce 1 million items, only 3.4, let's say 3, would fall outside the specification of your customer. With other words, a Six Sigma process has a very low standard deviation, so very low variation, because the standard deviation could be put next to each other 6 times until you reach the upper spec limit, or 6 times this way from the mean until you reach the lower spec limit. So literally a Six Sigma process has 6 standard deviation between the mean, so the average, and the specification of the customer. With every Six Sigma project, we start with a high variation, like in this red line. On average, you have high number of defects or mistakes or unnecessary steps in a process. And with a short period of time, typically 3 to 6 months, we reduce both the variation. So you can see it on this green line. We have less variation, And on average, we also reduced the defects, mistakes, and unnecessary steps. So this is the aim of Six Sigma.